2020 and beyond will be the start of the fall of the West and the rising of China. This will be the start of the end of Western civilization as we know it. The United States has decided that being a global presence is not as important as it once was to them. China has been taking over the economic development of Africa, looking to take over the South Pacific Sea, attempting to use its technological capabilities to undermine the West, all while not adhering to human rights within its own country. The West has kept its mouth shut, in fear of losing out on trade deals and having their own economies affected by standing up to China. This shows that China is officially a global power, and this decade is unquestionably going to become the #1 global power. I will show you in this video how China will take over the US, the global superpower, within this decade if things continue on as they have in the past decade, and how this will have devastating consequences for the world as we know it. China is a country with a growing population and a growing need for natural resources to fuel its economic growth. The West saw Africa as a land with natural resources and also human capital, i.e. the slave trade, which fueled the economic explosion of the US, or the Europeans who gave the African leaders loans from the IMF, which gave them access to the country's resources while keeping the countries in debt and the citizens in poverty. China is taking another approach, which seems like a vast improvement for the Africans, which are accepting it with open arms. Because of the new infrastructure, projects like high-speed rail, for example, in countries like Kenya and Ethiopia, these projects are mainly only hiring Chinese workers, while giving loans to the African countries, which still leaves them indebted with no betterment for the average African worker. This is China's strategy to make sure they have access to Africa's resources while providing a service with no benefit for the actual citizens of the country. Saying no benefit at all is clearly a stretch. However, there is no actual job growth or GDP for the economy because China is loaning the money for the projects, but then hiring its own workers to do the job. The next thing I wanted to focus on is China in the South Pacific Sea. China is starting to set military ports throughout areas where the US and Japan previously held its military operations. China is looking to expand its global presence. Here's an interesting clip that shows its unrelenting efforts to hold power in the region.
This is Chinese Yunshi Reef. China has sovereignty of the natural islands including Yunshi Reef and its adjacent waters. Leave immediately and keep far off so as to avoid any misunderstanding.
It's a routine occurrence for us on these flights. It happens throughout the flight where they come over and then we just go back with our standard response, and it really has no effect on any operations or anything we do.
Philippine military aircraft, I'm warning you again. Leave immediately or you will bear forward responsibility for all the consequences.
Two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 vehicles moving. Still looks like nothing along the runway. No aircraft present.
It's making sure that we maintain the rights that we have as a military aircraft to fly in international airspace, maintain our presence in the area, and show that we're not worried about the buildup that's happening, and that we are going to continue to stay down here in the South China Sea.
China is evolving its technological capabilities and finding itself using its censorship used within its own borders as an export to other countries. Most recently, a user of the popular app TikTok, who is an American, had her account banned because she was speaking about the cruel and horrible conditions the Chinese government are subjecting Uyghur Muslims to in so-called re-education camps to help eliminate quote-unquote terrorism, when in all actuality, it is an attempt to fully eradicate a religion and culture by all means necessary. This was reported by the New York Times, specifically Austin Ramsey, who is an investigative journalist who looked into this, and this was also found by many others. The truth about these camps is that they are doing these things and trying to hide it from the world, and here's a clip of the American who mentioned this on TikTok and what they did to her account.
Hi guys, so I'm going to teach you guys how to get long lashes. So the first thing you need to do is grab your lash curler, curl your lashes obviously, then you're going to put them down and use your phone that you're using right now to search up what's happening in China, how they're getting concentration camps, throwing innocent Muslims in there.
What appears to be a beauty lesson is actually 17-year-old Feroza Aziz trying to raise awareness about the detention of Uyghur Muslims in China.
Or else they're going to, of course, get murdered. People that go into these concentration camps don't come back alive. This is another Holocaust, yet no one is talking about it.
Following the posting of her 3-part tutorial, the American teen's TikTok account was suspended.
TikTok has taken down my video spreading awareness on the Uyghur genocide. This is proof that China is using TikTok to not let the truth be set free. China is scared.
ByteDance, the Beijing-based owner of TikTok, apologized for the suspension, blaming a human moderation error. It said the account was restored within less than an hour.
It's hard for outsiders to know the real reason. TikTok lacks transparency. It does not publish data on the videos it removes or the accounts it censors, nor it publish the algorithm it uses to determine which videos to censor, which accounts to suspend. So we just, as outsiders, it's really hard to know.
The firm's currently facing an inquiry by a US national security panel over its handling of personal data. US lawmakers fear it may be censoring politically sensitive content. China's foreign ministry said it had no specifics of this case.
You're saying the content is still on the TikTok account? I'm not aware of the situation. How could I know what's happening on the account of one individual?
And TikTok says it doesn't apply Chinese moderation principles to its product outside of mainland China.
I think it's not credible because we all know that Chinese companies answer not only to its investors, all Chinese companies answer not only to its investors, but also the Chinese Communist Party.
Huawei, a telecommunications giant in China, is starting to gain influence in Western nations in having its devices used, such as cell phones. However, there is speculation, but due to the financial benefits, there have been many companies and universities in partnership with the company to implement its technology. Here's a CBC report focusing on the relationship Huawei is starting to form with Canada. Because of what China did to the TikTok user's account, for example, one can only imagine what the Chinese government would do having access to Western countries' sensitive data.
They're either going to be a worldwide telecommunications company or an agent of the Chinese government.
This intermission brought to you by Huawei smartphones.
China's controversial tech giant Huawei is either the future of global communications or a giant Trojan horse bent on stealing valuable trade secrets and compromising Western security. Really, it depends on who you ask. Tonight on The National, we continue our special series on China's power with a look at this jewel in China's corporate crown. So how valuable is this company to Beijing? Consider that Canada's arrest of star CFO Meng Wanzhou last year touched off a diplomatic crisis that is still going on, and yet Huawei continues to do business here, even partnering with some of Canada's top universities. But who are these relationships really benefiting? Peter Armstrong digs deeper.
In a cramped Markham lab, Huawei researchers push the boundaries of the next generation of technologies, using your body to control a TV, your finger to control the volume, and nod of the head to play a video. All three researchers are products of Canadian universities trying to put their studies to work in the real world. a real world where Huawei is fighting against accusations that it's a very real threat to the security of Western nations.
We start creating a prototype and coding in order to show how feasible it is.
Huawei employs some 1,200 people in Canada. Nearly 1,000 of those are doing R&D. The company's VP of Corporate Affairs says Huawei is one of Canada's top spenders on information and communication technology research.
We would be, if not the biggest, then certainly one of the two biggest.
To do that, it's partnered with some of the biggest universities in Canada. CBC News has found 17 schools have had some kind of financial relationship with Huawei. Simon Fraser University in BC has agreements worth $8.5 million. The University of Alberta has deals worth $7.7 million. Waterloo tops the list with more than $15.3 million. U of T with more than $6.5 million. All told, Huawei is spending more than $56 million at Canadian universities.
Of course they want to come here.
That's Christopher Parsons, a senior research associate at the Citizen Lab and managing director of the Telecom Transparency Project. He says Canada is a world leader in wireless research. To maintain that, he says this kind of funding is desperately needed.
The concern, however, is not that. The concern is principally what happens to the information when it is produced.
And that's where things get hazy. Some schools are more forthcoming than others. UBC provided a clear breakdown and said all our research contracts include a publication clause guaranteeing UBC the right to publish results. Université Laval would only say the investment of Huawei is confidential as per the collaborative contracts. Guelph University says Huawei's invested in 2 research projects but refused to provide any details on the nature of that research. Huawei says it's committed to keeping the information in the public domain.
The researchers who collaborate with us have the ability to commercialize the research themselves.
But Parsons says that's only part of the picture. The real issue is the contract language.
What are the terms under which the patents are assigned, and are they being done in a way that are coherent with the Canadian government's foreign policy, foreign national security objectives?
The fear is that Huawei will send any patents back to China and prevent other companies from benefiting. It's not Huawei's only controversy. The company has become synonymous with the Chinese government, embroiled in accusations of spying and IP theft. Amid that, critics say the universities must have guidance.
Frankly, the government of Canada has fallen down catastrophically because it's just meant that no one knows exactly what they should be doing.
But the reality is Huawei is already here. It's working closely with Canadian wireless carriers and security agencies. And over more than a decade of operations here, the company says there hasn't been a single security incident or complaint.
If those counterparties didn't feel that we were a trustworthy actor or we were a company with whom they could do business, they wouldn't do business with us.
Experts say all this just can't be left up in the air. Huawei is at the heart of a debate that will impact how we communicate with one another for decades to come. The federal cabinet has only just been appointed, but these questions around Huawei, its research, and how Canadians will use the next round of technology must be at the top of the list of priorities. Peter Armstrong, CBC News, Toronto.
With China expanding its horizon globally, and the US pulling out of the world and not concerned about being a major global player, but rather taking a more nationalistic approach, this leaves the world stage open for a new power to be dominant. A dominant China means a global norm of censorship, human rights violations, no care for democratic rights and freedoms as we see in Hong Kong, among many other downfalls. The upcoming US election will provide some clear answers. However, if Trump decides that he is not interested in the geopolitics outside of the United States, then he has potential to severely undermine the US and give China a new foothold on the world stage.